And now we're joined by John Danek of the Hard Drive magazine. When you think of websites that parody news outlets, The Onion might come to mind, or maybe The Borowitz Report by Andy Borowitz in The New Yorker. Well, video games never really had that satirical outlet until the Hard Drive magazine. A spin-off of The Hard Times, The Hard Drive has given us hilarious headlines like "Racist JRPG fan casts heel on entire party whenever black character injured," or "Doc's Naughty Dog employee thankful to never be home." What makes these headlines so clever and biting is the way in which, in just a few words, it's able to encapsulate multiple issues. Like how angry fanboys dox video game developers, or how devs are often overworked so they're never home to begin with. Headlines like these are layered, which makes the sting all the more satisfying. So John, as writer for the Hard Drive, what is the process of putting together one of these stories?
So at Hard Drive, the crux of any article is the headline. The headline is the thing that anybody sees before they click. It's the idea that encapsulates the humor of an article. So at Hard Drive, we pitch based on the headline alone. And if you've read multiple Hard Drive articles, you'll see that they're kind of like a few popular formats. There's the opinion piece, there's the standard news style kind of parody. So then the idea, the joke behind the headline, the conceit gets fleshed out over a few paragraphs after that.
And then what is kind of like the back-end editorial process like in that? So for example, it was announced today that G4 TV is coming back, and maybe a joke could be, G4 TV returns with 40-hour blocks of Cops reruns or something, right? So is it like very collaborative? Do you guys like work together on trying to like hone that joke, or is it like the individual just kind of like goes for it?
It is very collaborative. Usually whenever there's a bigger news event like this G4 announcement, or say like the PS5 announcement, there'll be a concerted effort to get something published as soon as possible. So then whatever team members are available at the time will kind of concentrate on that topic and just pitch dozens of ideas and see what sticks.
I also notice is that, for example, a lot of, let's say, video game websites, they might just focus on video games, or esports websites might focus on esports and like influencers and YouTubers and whatnot. But the Hard Drive kind of goes after both, whereas IGN might just cover the video game industry alone. So at the team, like, are you guys noticing that esports stories involving, let's say, Zero or Ninja, these top players, do just as well as stories that are taking jabs at Sony and Microsoft?
That's a good question. I, as a contributor, don't have direct access to the numbers of the individual articles, but you can kind of track these things by seeing how well they do on social media. Those kind of give you a better indicator, and sometimes it's almost random. Maybe a certain topic hits on a certain day when something is happening in that world, and it seems to blow up more than you would expect, or we'll have an article that we think is just going to crush, and then it kind of comes out to more tepid response. So I don't know that we've seen much in terms of esports versus insider industry versus retro gaming. But I do think over, at least in the long term, in the past 3 years, esports has risen in its popularity and become more of a mainstream factor. And I think the numbers on the average overall reflect that.
And, when it comes to the headlines that you write, do you ever get attacked for some of these headlines that might be critical of people who generally dislike the video game industry, or maybe dislike kind of the politics within the video game industry, people who think it's like too liberal? And, I feel that the Hard Drive too, in itself, it's like taking a jab at these kind of hardcore gamers that maybe take things a little too seriously.
You definitely have haters with anything that you do in front of a large audience, but I think in general, we're kind of helped by two factors regarding that. One is the fact that we are admittedly like a source of comedy. So I think just that kind of deflates a lot of people's anger towards what the true message may be of an article or a headline. If it were just straight reporting and very earnest, sincere opinion pieces, that would probably have more of a negative backlash. But the second is the fact that we are unapologetically progressive with kind of our political stances. We're inclusive of all gender identities, sexual orientations, races, and kind of fight for that and hope to reflect that in our work. So I think it's pretty clear to most people from the outset. So I don't think anybody's expecting us to have a kind of regressive or incredibly conservative or, I don't know, hateful, stereotypical, whatever kind of perspective in our articles. So I think the audience kind of knows what they expect from Hard Drive.
And like some of these headlines that you've written, this is not game related, but it's something so bitingly specific that I kind of wonder how you came up with it. Where it's like we sit down with the composer who only uses distorted bass notes to make soundtrack for YouTube conspiracy videos. how, how does that come about?
That came about because whenever quarantine started, a friend from my hometown in Pennsylvania posted a link to a conspiracy video. And I was like, how do people fall for this? How do people fall for just obviously user-made videos that make statements with no verifiable sources or reliable sources? And then I started thinking about how they're like kind of these signature aspects to these videos that you can find regardless of topic. And one is like the music is always this very serious minor key kind of ambient electronic with a lot of heavy bass. So I kind of harped on that aspect of it.
Yeah. And then, do you ever, I guess to what extent, like, is there like some kind of reporter within you that's like, I got to find the actual composer and interview this guy?
Kind of within Hard Drive and Hard Times, which is really the parent site and organization, we kind of avoid realism. So I don't know that we would ever actually sit down and talk with somebody, with one exception, and that's we have a vertical called Hard Noise, and that's for actual real music journalism. So that will have interviews, but that doesn't have the satirical comedy aspect to it.
Why are places like The Onion or the Boards Report or the Hard Drive, like, how is that stuff important to journalism and the way we interpret the world around us?
I think it's important because in the modern era, comedy has become such a necessary part of communication. Whereas I think back to like, say the 1800s, you see a picture from somebody from the 1800s, they're never smiling. I don't think people made that many jokes. If you look for like what was considered comedy back then, like plays, they don't hold up today. And the way comedy has become so widespread from mass media and social networks and the internet at large, I feel like points can sometimes be made more effectively through comedy than just sincere, direct persuasion or debate. There's a little magic trick that comes with making a good joke where you hit the reader with a surprise instead of being upfront about it. And sometimes that can make the point you're making more clear almost.
No, I've seen the recent trend of, whether it be Last Week Tonight with John Oliver or Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj or what's the other one? The one with Samantha Bee. The name completely.
Full Frontal.
Yeah, Full Frontal, right? It's all really good stuff, but I'm just like, there's been an explosion of these like comedy news shows, and it's all, and the way I interpret it is because the news journalism has to be by its very nature bland or drab, or then it'll be accused of bias or malpractice. The comedians, they can upfront say that we are biased because we aren't news, therefore we can kind of like be more real in our interpretation of the events, where maybe most news outlets try to say that, oh no, we're just the purveyor of information, it's for you to interpret.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there, and I think that viewers today appreciate that honesty in a way that maybe traditional news sources might claim to be fully objective or balanced, which is impossible. Anytime a human is making decisions, it's not objective. The comedic news programs are upfront about where they stand and what their perspective is. And I think people appreciate not kind of being lied to or talked down to.
Yeah, I definitely feel that American journalism, they're still very wooed by the idea of objectivity and to show kind of like that there isn't bias, where when you compare it to maybe British journalism, there is that like constant tinge of my opinion is backing all of this. And I'm still kind of mixed on it. I still think the American model is better because I think it'll ultimately last longer through like the course of history. But clearly it's just like people aren't trusting the news to begin with, or there's so many people that are very distrustful of the news. So
I know what you mean. And when I am looking for information about a big news story, my go-to source tends to be Reuters. Because I do think out of all the massive news organizations, they tend to skew closest towards objectivity, or as much as a large organization with financial interest can. But it is a good question. So, and I'm not too familiar with English journalism to compare to, but I believe you in the few instances I've seen. I think I understand what you're talking about there.
there's still so much to discuss on like how comedy and satire play a role in kind of the American experiment of press and journalism and how that all fits in. But I'm really looking forward to like what the hard drive does as it continues to more and more delve into the world of esports. Please continue writing those headlines.
I'll try. I'll try to keep getting my mind through.
All right, and with that, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And that was FTW with Imad Khan. If you like the show, please rate, subscribe, and share. To find a transcript of the show, head on over to ftwimad.com. There, you can also find links to our Patreon. If you'd like to follow John and the work he's doing at the hard drive, he can be found at JJDanek on Twitter. If you'd like to follow Steven, he's at IamAsarch on Twitter. If you'd like to follow my writing over at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and elsewhere, follow me on Twitter at Imad. Annie Pei is our producer. Questions about the show can be directed to her at Pei_Annie on Twitter. Joe Domek is our outreach manager, and Ron Lyons is our researcher. With that, we'll catch you guys next week.